That's funny how we're both making espressos.
All right. Welcome to Lea County Pod. This is Jack Campbell, your facilitator, and Pete Militnik is our host. Pete, would you please introduce our guest today?
Thank you, Jack. Our guest today is John Yamrus, who comes to us from Pennsylvania, about 40 miles away from Philadelphia, right, John?
Yep, 40 miles west, exactly, right in the heart of Amish country.
Uh-huh. And John is a writer, and he's published quite a few books. Do you know how many offhand, John?
You know, it's funny. In recent years, I've actually lost count because there are translations and things coming out. But as close as I can figure, it's somewhere around 40, 41, give or take, plus or minus one.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive body of work. Um, you've published fiction and nonfiction fairly recently. A wonderful memoir titled "The Street." Most of what you published is poetry, but you think of yourself first as a writer. Why is that?
Okay, good question. And yes, I do. Well, first off, because I feel uncomfortable referring to myself or thinking of myself as a poet, a writer of poetry. When I think of poets, I think of, Whitman and people like that, Mayakovsky, real poets. Also, yeah, I don't think I've anywhere near that kind of status. So, and also I think calling myself a poet or a writer of poetry would be limiting. So I'm just a writer because over the course of my, oh gosh, March it'll be 55 years that I've been publishing. So over the course of 55 years, I've been lucky enough to publish a whole bunch of poetry, but also a children's book, 3 slim memoirs, and 2 really crappy novels. So I hope that answers.
A book about dogs, I think, too, right?
I did. That was one of my nonfictions, a book called 5 Dogs. In fact, I may have, well, I guess, yeah. Nope, I don't have it right here in front of me. A book called 5 Dogs about the dogs that we've had in our life and loved over the course of our time together, me and my wife, Kathy. And our 5th dog, Stella, is now 10 and a half and still, knock on wood, happy, healthy, and crazy as ever.
Oh, yes. Let me ask this, John, getting back to the poetry, what triggers a poem for you? Is it any one thing or several things?
I don't know. Maybe it's just an itch I can't scratch. Nothing really triggers a poem, and I don't go into writing a poem with an agenda. I don't go into writing something, any kind of writing, without a starting at point A and ending at point Z. I find out when I did try to write things with an agenda, it was usually pretty crappy. Um, like my memoir, The Street, which is a book about what it was like for me growing up in the late 1950s, um, in the middle of coal country, growing up less than wealthy. Um, my intention for that book, and it was the last time I wrote with any particular intention. My intention for that book was to have it be about 150 pages long. And at almost 74, I think I've gotten smart enough to let the word to follow my gut and to let the words lead me where they wanted to go. And with that book, the words told me that what I had written was enough and it was time to stop the book right then and there. So the book ended up being about, I don't know, 110 pages, but I always refer to it as a poem with a thyroid condition. It's really just an overgrown poem, a look back, like I said, at what it felt like growing up in the late 1950s. Um, a kind of sepia-toned look back at what it felt like for me. I'm sorry, I'm taking over this conversation. Uh, I should
No,
have a slit
not really,
swig
because
of
we want to know about you. We want to know what inspires you to write, why you write, and what you think is important about being a writer.
And one question I've got, John, you're overall very prolific, I would say. And do you have any poems that you begin that you, let's say, throw away that don't end up seeing the light of day or being kept?
okay. I'm not a big saver. I run into a lot of aspiring writers. I talk to a lot of writers groups, and it seems every young writer really likes to save everything and work on things and hammer on things. And for me, at least, the way I work, I've found it better for me to, if things don't work out right immediately, and I've been doing this a long time, so I know when things are right. If they don't work out right immediately, I throw them away. I don't save poems or save any prose pieces I'm working on, because when I go back and hammer at them and work on them and try to piece things together and cut and patch and paste, it looks it. And all the nail marks and cut marks really show. When the writing is working, uh, it has a certain flow and it comes off. You talk to musicians, and musicians will say, I didn't really write that song. I just happened to be there when it was passing through the air, and I'm the one who wrote it down. And that's the way I feel about my poems. If they're right, I'm just lucky enough to grab them as they're passing through the air.
And perhaps just intuitively know whether it's working or not.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think you wanted to touch on. I'm kind of known as a minimalist in my poetry.
Yes.
And I really do take that as a badge of honor, because uh, writers, especially younger writers, want to really show off, want to show how good they are with the words. And for me, poetry, especially by definition, is about saying as much as you can in as few words as possible. And I really take that to heart. A good example, and I've mentioned this many times, my real aha kind of moment. Oh, it's probably going back 20 years now. And I had already had maybe 20 books under my belt by that time. But I wrote a poem, and I know for a fact it was 17 words. The 17 words that I wrote at that time were, write a poem about that, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling. And there was a time before I wrote that when I would continue to describe the bed, describe the room, describe her. And my aha moment was when, bam, it just came into my head, and I realized that the reader's conception of the room, the girl, and what that was so much more powerful and complete than anything I could ever write. And so leaving that said unsaid was my ticket to finishing the poem properly. And since then, it was like the clouds parted for me, and I finally understood in a small way how to write. So things have been easier since then. I hope that answers the question.
Experience is the great teacher. That and if you good reading too. Um, any more about a minimalist style?
You know, it's weird to say that being a writer, I should be a talker, but being a writer on the page, I'm more of a listener. So yeah, I'm really happy to keep things to a minimum and sit back and, like I said before, let the reader come up with their own part of this story.
Sure. And you know the fewer words one has in certainly in the poem, the more each word has to count. I know you read a lot, John.
I do.
Are there any particular writers who have influenced your poetry?
Well, there are people who have influenced my poetry. Of course, as writers, you know, you got the usual like Bukowski and people like that. And I have writers that I really enjoy and go back to time and again. Like I've read Grapes of Wrath probably every 3 or 4 years my entire life since I've been a kid. And like I said, I'm going to be 74 very soon. And Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's another book that I read every few years. And for my money, that's like the gold standard for mood, and it's really the scariest book I've ever read, and I really enjoy going back to it and reading it, especially on a winter's night, you know, when you're under the covers and there's just one light on in the room. And I like Stephen King um, because of the way he handles a sentence. He keeps things clean and clear, and he doesn't show off. Another book I come back to time and again is War and Peace. That monster of a book I've probably read, I think, 11 or 12 times now, and
Wow.
keeps getting better. And of course, Proust. He's another person. I've read that book again, probably 11 or 12 times, and I'm reading it off and on my whole life, and always going back to it. And like all great books, it keeps giving me more. Yeah, I guess that's the quintessential description of a great book. Yeah, you get me started about writers. Right now, I'm on a kick about going back to the classic Greek and Roman people, and I'm currently reading or just finishing up Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and Plotinus. And I found Seneca kind of boring. I found Plotinus really interesting, but a kind of a gateway drug to Marcus Aurelius. And for me, he's the one who has it all, at least for me. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Ask me some more questions.
And you know, one poet that we have in common, who you know far better than I, the late Gerald Lachlan, who I met when he visited Hobbs, New Mexico, where Jack and I are, and I know
Jared
you're
Lachlan,
familiar with the man and his work.
for anybody who, you know, everybody's familiar with Bukowski, but for my money, Lachlan was right up there with Bukowski. Just as prolific. He's probably published 7,000 poems over the course of his life. And he and I went back right to the beginning of my career as a writer. I don't know, 20, 21, and this was in the middle of the Mimeo Revolution. Anybody who could buy a $200 spirit duplicator, which operated with a crank, could put out their own magazine. And I had a little magazine, which is now archived in a couple of universities already. It was called Canto at the time, and an earlier version of that magazine was called Etc. In any case, I was just this 21-year-old kid looking for not subscriptions, submissions. And Gerald Laughlin, who was already a small press legend at that time, sent me stuff, and he would send me these 3, 4, 5-page letters, typewritten, full of gossip and hints and tips and names of people that he would send my way, me, a young nobody. And he was kind and beyond kind. And he taught me how to pass things on and to nurture other writers. And I really took that to heart. And for anybody who's not familiar with Lachlan, check him out. His books are really good, especially his books on jazz and great art.
Yeah. I have a question. You obviously write to be read by other people, and you have said that others don't come knocking at your door, rather you have to go to them. Why is that so important, going to the readers?
Well, yeah, I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. Poetry is a very solitary thing, but writing the poems is just part of the process, and you got to get people to read it. If it's not getting read, you might as well not even write it. So, I do whatever I can to get people to read and appreciate the work. You and I were both great lovers of dogs. Well, no, let me go back. We were talking about that minimalism part of me, and this is one of my most reprinted poems. It was in one of my earlier books, and then it appeared in my book, Selected Poems, The Directors. And I could tell you a story about this book after I read this poem about my pairing and cutting poems. Goes like this. He asked me, how do I write a poem? And when do I know that it's done? That was a fair enough question, so I gave him a fair enough answer. I told him that I write it all down. I write it all down and start cutting. I keep cutting till I hit bone. And when I do, there's your poem.
Yes, I remember that one.
You and I are big dog lovers, which makes you a good guy in my book. This is one of my most reprinted dog poems. My dogs bark at the neighbors, bark at the UPS man, bark at cars and kids on bicycles. They bark at the TV, the radio, and the stereo. They bark at the vacuum, the dust mop, and the broom. They bark at anyone who enters the house uninvited. And when they're not barking, they're sitting there, waiting for something to bark at. Good dogs.
Well, thank you for sharing those. One thing I was interested in, are you working on a new manuscript right now? I know you just published a book of poems, Don't Shoot the Messenger. But are you working on a new manuscript?
Messenger, don't shoot the messenger. Just give them a good place to hide.
Yeah, if you could read something
I
from,
wanted the book to be a little bit longer, but like I said, this book told me when it was done. And when I sent it off to a few people, you know, to get their opinions, they said it was perfect. The length was just right. And all my books, I try to have them have a certain sense of pace and flow. And the way I do that is I'll physically print out all the poems that are intended for the book, and I'll lay them out on a table, or if there's a lot of them, I'll lay them out on the floor. And I pick the first and the last, and then I kind of start picking out in between. And the poems again tell me which ones go where. And it's kind of like jazz, an intuitive process where you learn to trust your gut. And you know that old Zen thing, the sound of the guy jumping out the window, happy, shouting all the way down. This is fun talking to you guys. But you asked me, am I working on anything new now? I have poems that did not make the cut for Messenger. It's not that they weren't good enough, but they didn't feel right for this book. So they get held off for the next book. And so that's what I'm starting on now, is a new book of poetry. Prose, that kind of comes and goes, but the poems are always there. And you talked about the process. I come down here in my room down here in the morning, and I'll make myself a cup of coffee. In fact, I got this. No. I got this in Albuquerque. And I liked it so much that for my double espresso, I got this. So, well, I come down here every morning and try to write, at least for a while. And most of the times it's just crap and I end up throwing it out. But I've my entire life made it a habit of trying to be professional and serious about what I do. I went back earlier and I told you that I talked to a lot of aspiring writers, and the thing they'll always say, I'll say, what are you working on now? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh, nothing. I'm reading. I'm waiting for inspiration. And I always say that inspiration is for amateurs. You go out and you do the work, and every now and then you'll get inspired. But in the meantime, you got to go out and do the work. Baseball players, that great catch doesn't always happen, but you got to go out and practice.
exactly. And, with that in mind, in writing and as well as in publishing, is there any upside, anything to be learned from failure? Are there any failures? And by the same token, what to you as a writer, an author, is success?
That's an interesting wow, that's deep. Success, there's 2 successes. When you finish the thing and you did a good job. And the second success is when the reader, often when you're reading to them directly, responds the way you hope they would. But then there's also a success part 2/B, where the reader comes, again, when you're reading it live to the person, and they discover something else hidden in the lines that you didn't consciously mean, and they find something else, and that's a double success for me. And while you guys got me here, you were talking about people that I really enjoy reading. This is one of your newest books.
Oh, yeah.
And I really like this book.
The book with my longest title.
Yeah. And you're a writer who I really like and respect. And again, you do the job. You carry your lunch pail to work every day and you do the job, and I respect that.
Well, thank you. And I think as with anything, part of the goal is reaching the goal. It's so important to like slash love what you do, and embrace embrace those lows as well as the highs. It's all part of it, um, and I think that's the fundamental thing to really enjoy it. But for me, it's being able to keep myself interested, and I think that's where reading comes in too. Was very important because how does one learn to write? Really, if one learns to write by reading other writers, is the main thing, not
Yeah.
a workshop necessarily. I have one. Speaking of workshop and all, there's more of a proliferation of social media today than there was, let's say, 10 years ago, certainly even 5 years ago. And I'm noticing a lot of writing communities that are on social media work with prompts. And I like to keep as open-minded as anybody else. But if you said to me, we're all going to write a poem about a plant or about a coffee cup, I might be banging my head against the wall saying, well, gee, I would rather write about a bowling ball or something. I'm not a prompt kind of a person. And when I'm writing, one of my teachers a long time ago said a writer is a person alone in the room with the English language. And I have found that to be true. A person alone, and they might have gotten it from W.H. Auden or something. What about how do prompts ever get you going?
No, no. I had a friend long ago named Bill James. He was an aspiring folk singer, and he used to say, I ain't no jukebox, meaning that you can't put a quarter in and get a song out. And that's the way I feel about my poems. They are what they are, and I I I can't write poems, made to order. I know some people, I know very few people, one very specifically, Nolcha Fox, who has mastered the art of writing with prompts and writing with others. I was never good on the playground. I do not play well with others. Um, but Nolcha's very good at it. Um, People will ask, what inspires you? And you talked about reading. Um, Again, I'll encounter aspiring writers who all say, what are you reading now? And they'll say, nothing. I don't want to mess with my gift. And I want to punch them in the face. Because if you're not reading, if you're not keeping inspired, if you're not checking up on the competition, you're cheating yourself. And man, if I couldn't read Balzac or Zola or anybody like that, I'd go crazy. And it makes my job easier and my life more complete. But memory, you and I have talked about this in our email exchanges, and memory plays a big part in my writing, including even, again, my new book, Don't Shoot the Messenger. If I could, I'm known as a minimalist, but this is for me, a long poem, which will take about 90 seconds to read. So let me read this, if I may. And again, it goes back to memory. Take a walk around the old neighborhood where I grew up, on the street where I lived. Take a left at the corner and walk down the hill toward the tracks. There used to be an old oak tree we called the old oak tree. It was the biggest tree I ever saw in my life and hard as hell to climb. The lowest branches were way up high and you had to jump and grab one end of it. And it was always kind of cool if you made it and got to sit there on the branches, waiting for the train, or to watch the kids on their bikes flying down the hill toward the gas station. It's gone now, all of it. Right after the flood, they got rid of the tree and put in a road where the kids used to ride. The road's smooth and new, and there's nothing there that give you any shade or even a reason to climb.
One of my favorites from your new book, John, and that book is out from the Anxiety Press, and it's available on Amazon, I believe.
It is, as are all of my newer books, and I'm sure some of yours, many of yours. It's a double-edged sword, Amazon. It helps reach readers, yeah, the books are on Amazon. Here's one, People and Other Bad Ideas. I've had a lot of fun with the titles of my books, People and Other Bad Ideas. I think the favorite title, with the exception of Don't Shoot the Messenger, is one of my earlier books, the title of which is Doing Cartwheels on Doomsday Afternoon.
Huh.
It's a good book. I like that book. But
Jack,
getting back to
how are we doing?
Okay, we probably need to wrap it up. Zoom is about to kick us off, so.
Okay, I'll let John. It's been great visiting with you. I'll just let Jack close it out, and maybe we can do this again sometime. You're looking good and all.
We thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jack, and it's a pleasure meeting you. Pete and I go back a couple years, but this is my first contact with you, and I'm enjoying it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for Lea County Pod, and we're out.
See you soon.